So good evening. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Diana Vasquez. I'm the BERDO Review Board Manager. The Review Board does not currently have an appointed chair, so I will lead us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone on the board want to make a nomination for acting chair for today's meeting?
I nominate Stephen Ellis as acting chair.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. How do you vote in having Board Member Ellis serve as acting chair today? Board Member Boyd?
In favor.
Board Member Ellis?
In favor.
Board Member Faruqi?
In favor.
And Board Member Lattimore?
In favor.
And Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
Great, thank you so much. I will now hand the meeting over to Acting Chair Ellis.
Thank you, Diana. Good afternoon. I am calling this public meeting to order at 4:35 p.m. in accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances, Section 7-2.2. The Review Board will hold a virtual public meeting at 4:30 on December 9th to review the following topics in regard to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. For the record, I am Stephen Ellis, acting chair of the board. We will now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Rashida Boyd.
Stephen Ellis.
Hassan Faruqi.
Gail Lattimore.
Jack Nelson.
Staff will now introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Payne. I'm the Director of Carbon Neutrality in the Environment Department. And for the audience that is not the review board, the carbon neutrality team in the Environment Department works on decarbonizing Boston's buildings, so reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from buildings and improving their energy efficiency, including the implementation of BERDO, so overseeing all of BERDO.
Hi, everyone. Diana Vasquez, BERDO Review Board Manager. I work closely with the Review Board and on Hannah's team with the building decarbonization work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Claudia Diaz Martinez. I'm the Policy and Equity Advisor for the Carbon Neutrality team in the Environment Department and also help the implementation of BERDO.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ziggy Chin. I'm the BERDO Review Board Assistant, and I work closely with Diana and the Review Board.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Samina Samin, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for the Environment Department.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Chang. I am the Boston Community Choice Electricity Engagement Assistant working on the city's electricity program.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brooks Winter. I'm the Building Decarbonization Program Manager in the Environment Department.
Hello, I'm Kathy Miranda. I'm a Senior Housing Officer for the Office of Housing Stability.
Thank you. Here is the agenda for today's meeting. We will start with the inaugural BERDO Review Board meeting for tenants. We will then vote to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting and hear administrative updates. Finally, we will end with an adjournment. So starting off, we will hear some information about BERDO and resources for tenants. I will now hand it over to the city.
Hi, everyone. So I'll kick us off. So before we even get into the nitty-gritty, I was hoping we could take a step back for folks. If this is your first time joining us at a public meeting, maybe provide some context as to what these typically look like. So on today's meeting, you can see we have a lot of City of Boston staff. So I just wanted to highlight who's represented here today. From the City of Boston, we have a lot of folks from the Environment Department, but we also have Kathy, thank you, Kathy, from the Mayor's Office of Housing. So really trying to get a large swath represented. Just for some background information, all of these meetings are recorded. So as you might have heard me say at the top, these meetings are recorded. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Typically, the acting chair helps moderate the conversation. So Board Member Ellis graciously is helping moderate today's meeting. The City of Boston, typically present, and then we have public comment periods where folks from the public are welcome to ask questions or just even submit just a general comment. You're welcome to either use the chat function or the raise your hand function. And then also typically the review board members ask questions and we try to respond as we can. And then for after the meeting, all of the slide decks, recordings, and meeting minutes are available online. So we try to upload slide decks and recordings the next day. So well, everything but the meeting minutes should be available by tomorrow. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what is the inaugural annual tenants meeting, you may be asking? So BERDO, or the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, is a local law that was adopted formally in 2021. But this formal adoption triggered the need to then develop rules related to BERDO. And during this implementation and developing of rules, we had lots of meetings where there was a really big interest or need for more attention to tenants within BERDO. And so this actually resulted in this annual tenants meeting finalized in the policies. So this won't be the last meeting, but it will be the first. So each year, the review board is mandated to have at least one meeting fully dedicated to residential tenants within BERDO. So just taking the time to say thank you for attending this very first meeting. It's a really big deal, and I'm glad to see we have such a high turnout because it's great to see that so many people are engaged. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to very quickly highlight what is BERDO in case we have some folks who are new to BERDO and are curious about what it is. BERDO stands for Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. It's a local building decarbonization law, and it really targets Boston's largest source of emissions, which are buildings. And more specifically, BERDO is about existing buildings. So existing buildings contribute about 70% of the total community-wide emissions in Boston, and BERDO requires medium and large-sized buildings to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions over time, and hopefully reaching net zero by 2050. Next slide. So which buildings are subject to BERDO? Buildings that are 20,000 square feet or larger, or residential buildings that have at least 15 units and above are subject to BERDO. We do have a little bit of a staggered starting year for emissions limits, but the largest buildings have a starting emissions limits compliance in 2025, and then the smaller buildings within BERDO have a starting year of 2030. Next slide, please. And I won't spend too much time on the limits themselves, but I think a key takeaway is they're based on the building use types, and they slowly decrease over time until they reach zero by 2050. Next slide. Similarly, I won't spend too much time on what we require specifically from building owners, but there are three main things that a building owner can expect to do under BERDO. One, report their annual energy and water use every year. Two, have their data third-party verified just to ensure that it's pretty accurate. And then three, of course, is reduce their emissions over time. And then how can building owners comply? We sort of say there are three main ways to do that. One, of course, is reducing energy use in the buildings themselves by building retrofits or improvements, obtaining renewable energy. So there are multiple ways that a building owner could do that. And then our third one is make alternative compliance payments, which are payments collected by the city that then go into the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund to support building decarbonization projects within the city of Boston. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Ziggy.
All right, so I'll be covering what is the review board. So the BERDO Review Board is the governing body that oversees the implementation of BERDO. It provides community authority over the ordinance, and it's made up of 9 members. 6 seats are for individuals nominated by community-based organizations or CBOs. 1 seat is for the city councilor, and this is the chair of the Environmental Justice, Resiliency, and Parks Committee. And then 2 seats are for individuals who are self-nominated or nominated by another entity that is not a CBO. And board members must have expertise in at least in the following areas: environmental justice, affordable housing, labor rights, workforce development, building, engineering, energy, real estate, public health, hospitals, architecture, and historic preservation. And the first board was inaugurated in June 2023. So these are the CBEOs that could nominate someone to join the board. This list was made in 2023 and every 5 years. So in 2028, the application process will open again to have CBOs join these lists, and they can nominate more board members when we have a empty seat. And so this is the roles and responsibilities of the review board. It includes review and approve or deny applications for flexibility measures, allocate funding for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund, enforce the ordinance including issuing fines and penalties, recommend changes to compliance mechanisms or regulations, propose updates to emission standards, alternative compliant payments, and approve the use of PPAs and on-site renewable energy systems in special circumstances.
And I can chime in on our last section before we open up a public comment period. How can tenants get involved? So next slide. So, when we talk about BERDO, we think there are several groups who are impacted by BERDO. Of course, all of Boston residents, because we help improve air quality for everyone. Boston building owners, as the folks who are regulated and being tasked with the action of reducing their emissions. Boston workers, as we're hoping BERDO can be part of the bigger picture of developing a more robust Boston economy around the transition to more carbon neutral buildings. And then, of course, for today's meeting, building tenants. So how can BERDO help improve the experience for tenants within their buildings? Next slide. Next slide again. So here are some ways that as a tenant you can engage in the near term with BERDO. We have a couple of resources that we thought would be worth sharing. So step 1 is identify if you live in a BERDO building. The covered buildings list is our master document of all of the buildings that within the city of Boston that are covered by BERDO. It's a little over 6,000 buildings in the city, so as you can imagine, it's a lot of buildings. But the covered buildings list has all of that information laid out. And you can click on there. It's open to the public. You can search for your address and see if it's listed. Step 2 is you can understand your building's reported data. So this link is disclosure. This disclosure has all of the buildings' reported data. So their energy data, their water data, sort of, what has been reported in the past. So you can kind of see where a building is standing currently. And we also have a BERDO emissions calculator. The calculator shows a projected emissions until 2050. So you can even see how your building is projected to do over the next several decades, if it's going on the same rate that it's going at right now. Step 3 is attend review board hearings. I'm so happy to see so many people joining because this is one of the best ways to engage with BERDO. Our review board is always meets publicly and always accepts public comments. So this is a really great way to stay abreast of any updates. And I just wanted to point out that public meeting agendas are posted 10 days in advance. So if you ever are curious about what's on the agenda, you could go to this website under upcoming events. And I wanted to highlight that for some applications, we also ask applicants to post a notice within residential buildings, and we have translated flyers and a template flyer for that. So hopefully folks are doing that as well, and you should get a notice within your building. And then consider energy measures for your unit. I won't speak to this a whole lot because we have way better speakers to speak on these as well, but consider enrolling in Boston Community Choice Electricity and take advantage of Mass Save. Next slide. And then how can I engage as a tenant in the long term? Some things to keep in mind in the future. So future data disclosures are published on October 1st of every year, and that's for data from the previous calendar year. But every year we try to keep the data updated by October 1st, and future versions will include things that the review board approves, like flexibility measures. So they'll have, as much data as we can provide. Um, Always, please feel free to share concerns with the review board or staff. So obviously attending a review board hearing is an option, and you can submit a comment this way, either at a hearing or via email. But you can also always reach out to BERDO staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. We try to reply in a timely manner, and make sure that you're answered to the best, or we answer to the best of our abilities. And then something that in the long term, in the future, there are certain circumstances where a group of tenants can organize to request to terminate a flexibility measure if an owner did not meet conditions. So I really wanted to highlight that as well as a future uh, thing to keep an eye out for. And then finally, keep up to date with BERDO updates. So we have a BERDO and review board newsletter where we always email about updates and upcoming events. And I actually think it's probably one of the best ways to stay um, abreast of all of the things that are going on within BERDO. So that is my spiel. And I think the next thing is a public comment period. So I will
Diana,
hand.
can I just add one thing to the end of that? So
Oh yeah.
thanks for that great overview that you heard, but I just want to also share with members of the public that are joining. BERDO is still really new, and there's a lot that we are working through with building out new processes, really all with the goal of reducing Boston's greenhouse gas emissions and addressing climate change in a very serious way. But that being said, we are really, this is figuring this out as we go in many ways, and it's very, very helpful to hear from folks who are being impacted in any way, positively, negatively, or just are confused about things while we're doing this. So just wanted to reiterate that, if you do have questions about BERDO, and if you live in a BERDO building, if you have any concerns, really do feel free to reach out to our staff. We're always happy to talk to people and really understand what's happening on the ground, because that can help us make BERDO really operate as it's intended to be, as a tool to address the climate crisis and also to address environmental injustices in Boston and right them in many ways. So just wanted to add that emphasis to thank you for joining to this evening, sharing your feedback this evening, but also please feel free to reach out to our team at other points in the year as well.
Yes. Thank you, Hannah. And as soon as I lied, I forgot to mention that we do have the schedule of 2025 hearings. So this is the schedule for 2025. So if you are interested in joining, they're held every second and fourth Monday of the month. But as I mentioned, all the recordings are also shared online. So if you can't make them, you can always look at the slide deck or see a recording. Yeah. Now I hand it over to Acting Chair Ellis.
Thank you, Diana. I would like to open a public comment period. As a reminder to members of the public, to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. Send your questions to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. If we have a high volume of comments, we may ask folks to limit their comments to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. If you can, we would also appreciate if you would introduce yourselves. We will now wait to give members of the public an opportunity to provide comments. And as we are waiting, I know that we already have one comment in the chat from Arlene asking, how can I find out if my private development is in compliance?
So I can answer that question, Arlene. So as Diana mentioned, you can do two different things. One, you can look at the annual disclosure that was linked and search for your building address. I will say that sometimes if you live in a building that maybe has a few addresses, like is 9 to 13 Mass Ave, you may have to look at it in a few different ways, but an identifier is if you can find it in the assessing database, that's a way to look for it. So I know you had said that you were having trouble finding it. So I don't know if that is a solution there. We're happy to help you figure out where your property is and help you find that information. And then the other way is looking at the calculator that we linked. So the BERDO calculator is a way to look at the emissions from a building and the energy use that's been reported for that building. So if the building is in compliance with reporting, there should be data that is reported in the calculator, and it should show the latest, most recent greenhouse gas emissions, as well as projecting what the projecting what those emissions will look like against future emissions limits. Now, there are a couple caveats there. Sometimes there are issues in how that data is calculated. If your building is part of what we call a campus, that can make things complicated. So that often happens if there are multiple buildings on a parcel. So oftentimes this is like a university campus might have this, but sometimes also housing developments will be set up in that way. And there are some reasons for that I'm happy to go into if folks on the call are curious. But that is, those are the two ways that I would check it. And if you're having trouble, please feel free to reach out to the team, or and we can follow up with you on finding that information for you.
Thank you, Hannah. And I know I'll definitely get over to Linda Freeman. There was a second question, and I'm assuming you're attempting to answer that second question in the chat there, Hannah. Arlene also stated, just mentioned it should be posted. If it's not what I can do. I'm not sure I fully understand the question unless Arlene would like to come off of mute and perhaps clarify the question for us. Okay, we'll circle back if needed, and I will now turn it over to Linda.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Yes,
Okay.
I had to find a button.
No
Okay,
problem.
you said that it's supposed to be posted. So if it is not posted in my development in the management office, what should I do? Should I tell them about it, or is this something that we can report that they are not being in compliance with?
I can answer that question if I may, Chair Ellis.
Okay.
Arlene, thank you for the question. I think you were, when we mentioned that something needs to be posted in the management office, that is for if your building is having a public hearing before the review board. So if that, and Diana, maybe you can jump in with the specifics of when that is. So for most buildings, they have not come before the review board and had a public hearing. The board has seen a few applications so far, but for the most part, most buildings won't have to post any notice until that hearing. So you may not see anything in the office, and that's okay. I mean, really at this point with BERDO, it's still pretty early stages, so you may not have heard much about it in your building, and that should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your question, Arlene. I will now turn it over to Linda Freeman. I see your hand.
Thank you. My question is this: due to the upcoming or incoming change of administration regarding number 47 and policies, how will this affect BERDO as for Boston and as Massachusetts as a state? Not, part of it is what his decisions are, how will it impact all of us?
And I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So I can try to answer that. So Linda, if I'm understanding your question correctly, it's about the federal government and the incoming president and the incoming presidential transition. So BERDO is a local law, so it was passed by the city council and signed by the mayor. And the authority for BERDO stems from the Massachusetts state constitution. So we're not anticipating any kind of direct major shifts for BERDO because of the presidential transition at the federal level. I don't have a crystal ball. Your guess is as good as mine of kind of where environmental policy kind of at large will go. It's certainly something that, you know, we're following in the city of Boston and really trying to make sure that the work that we're doing to address climate change can and will continue. But for, you know, we do feel pretty strongly that BERDO is, you know, not to be impacted directly by that presidential transition.
Thank you.
And Hannah, just to ask the secondary question to Linda's question, do you anticipate any issues with current financial incentives that are being provided to building owners with respects to the change of the presidential federal transition?
For the most part, no. So a lot of the incentives that are available to building owners for energy efficiency and electrification and decarbonization in Massachusetts come from the Mass Save program. And that program is funded entirely through ratepayer funds. So doesn't get federal funding. And so that program is pretty well insulated from anything happening at the federal government. There are tax credits available from the federal government. From what I know today, those are continuing, but that might be an impact going forward. In addition, there is federal funding through the IRA that the state of Massachusetts, we received an award of $20 million. The state of Massachusetts received $20 million to help implement BERDO in Boston and BEUDO in Cambridge, which is the acronym for the basically very similar equivalent policy and law in Cambridge. That funding is intended to go for the majority of that is going to support technical assistance for building owners subject to BERDO or BEUDO and workforce development. We have heard positive indications that we should be able to receive that money. But there are, I think there's still some questions of, the full delivery of large grants like that are very focused on climate change and environmental justice. But again, I don't have a crystal ball. Everything that I have been told to date is that funding will come through and with the signed agreement will be okay for being able to receive and to pursue that project as planned.
Thank you for your response, Hannah. And thank you, Linda, for your question. And also thank you, Arlene, for your question earlier. The next question that I see here in the chat is coming from Francis, and I apologize if I pronounce your last name incorrectly. Alcia manages the 151 Tremont Street 376 condo unit and was built in 1967. Francis's question is, how was BERDO established? Number one. Did the EPA do an assessment of air quality in Boston? What is the number, that's number two. What is the number of carbon for the city of Boston that is deemed a dangerous level? Number three, what is the number that Boston is looking to be in compliance? So a four-part question. I'm going to turn it over to the city. I believe, Hannah, you look like you're ready to respond.
Yeah, thanks, Francis, for the question. I can try my best to answer it, and then I will welcome any follow-up questions that you might have. So BERDO was established, well, there was, in 2013, the city of Boston passed an energy benchmarking requirement. So this was what we now refer to as BERDO 1.0. This was the Building Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance. So this required large buildings in Boston to report their energy use to the city annually. Then in in the 2019 Climate Action Plan that the Environment Department produced, in that Climate Action Plan, the creation of a building performance standard, building upon that benchmarking ordinance, that was named in the Climate Action Plan. So set as a goal that the city was going to pursue a building performance standard. And what that means is really setting emissions limits for existing buildings based on their energy that they report annually. So after the Climate Action Plan, there was a lot of technical work done to study that and look at how a building performance standard might be created, and a lot of community engagement to really understand what was important for the Boston community to include in that ordinance. And so there were several years of development of the draft language of the ordinance. And then in 2021, that BERDO 2.0, the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, as we know it now, that was passed by the City Council and signed by the mayor at the time. So that is a very short overview of the process of how this version of BERDO was created. To the second question, did the EPA do an assessment of the air quality in Boston? I do not know. I don't have an answer to that. Really what BERDO is regulating are carbon emissions, which have the biggest impact on climate change. And the city of Boston has set a goal to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions by 2050 to reduce the city's contribution to climate change. So that is really what BERDO is looking to regulate. At the same time, we know that burning fossil fuels, which are the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions, that burning fossil fuels also creates poor air quality impacts locally in Boston. So contributes to, bad air quality that can contribute to health impacts. So I don't know off the top of my head if there's, to be able to point to a specific EPA assessment, but that's really kind of where BERDO came from and what it's trying to address. So looking at carbon emissions, but also understanding that those carbon emissions are associated in many ways with local air quality impacts. And then I think your final two questions I would answer is, we do an annual greenhouse gas inventory for the city of Boston, both for our municipal operations, but also for the entire community of Boston. So we can assess annually what the greenhouse gas emissions being released across the community are. And our goal as a city is to get those emissions community-wide down to net zero. So what that means is get them as close to zero as possible, and anything remaining we need to find a way to offset. And so that is really what BERDO is looking to address. We from that inventory and assessment, we know that large buildings in Boston are the biggest contributor to climate change, the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions in Boston. And so that's why BERDO is so impactful, because while only impacting about 5% of the buildings in Boston, it's addressing 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So I hope that answered your questions, and I would be happy to provide any follow-up if you have further questions and want to come off of mute. Or sorry, I should have probably let Chair Ellis say that. But.
No worries. Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate that. And Francis, please feel free to let us know if you would like to come off mute. Feel free to raise your hand or type another message in the chat. And thank you for your questions that you provided earlier. I am going to now move on to the question from Mary Ann and Harold Brogan. Will there be any funding sources for old historical buildings in Boston? Also, will there be any exception made for buildings that have restrictions and types of updates that can be done in the building? Marianne and Harold building was built in 1905. Hannah?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So thank you for raising it. We don't have any funding sources specifically for historic buildings in Boston. However, there are a number of funding sources available at the moment to address this. And I think the first one I would point to is the Mass Save program, which we will hear about a bit later from Brooks on my team. And then the other is we just launched a program called the Building Decarbonization Advisor Program. And in this program, we're matching underserved or under-resourced BERDO building owners with building science firms to help them develop zero over time plans and get some customized technical assistance. And so if maybe I can ask someone on my team to put that link in the chat. And I would take a look at the eligibility requirements and see if if your building situation fits in that, and consider applying. We just closed our applications for our first cohort, which will start in January, but we expect a second cohort to start in the spring. So please apply if you are interested, and hopefully we can get you into the spring cohort if you're eligible. So those are two things that I would point to in terms of funding sources. And then in terms of exceptions, there's a flexibility measure called a hardship compliance plan, which this review board oversees and has to approve. And in that, there's a lot of requirements, but it's really an opportunity for a building to get a customized compliance plan if they have unusual circumstances or characteristics that make it more difficult to comply with the emission standard based on those unusual circumstances and characteristics. So not all historic buildings will necessarily need that. There's a lot that historic buildings can do, and that's why we really encourage you to report your energy, that building owners report their energy early so they can see where they're at with their emissions, and then also connect with Mass Save or another building professional to get some assessment of what might be able to be done in the building. Because we have examples in Boston and around Massachusetts of historic buildings that have been able to go all electric and do really deep energy retrofits and energy efficiency projects. So it is specific to the building. So my message to anyone on the line who is responsible in some way for BERDO emissions compliance is to start that planning early and reach out to folks to start to understand what opportunities might be there.
Thank you, Hannah. And again, thank you to Marianne and Harold Bogan for their question. I am also going to leave this public comment period open a little bit longer in case folks, again, would like to participate. Please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Claudia, I'm going to ask for a favor here. I forgot to do this earlier. If you don't mind, you've shared a myriad of resources in the chat. If you can just call them out so that those who are participating on the phone may be able to hear and understand what type of resources you're sharing in the chat for the general public.
Sure. And that's a good point. So we have shared a myriad of links related to BERDO. You will see there the covered buildings list. This is again our spreadsheet where we list all of the buildings that are covered by this ordinance. We also linked the disclosure data website where you can see the reported data from buildings since BERDO started operations. Then we have the BERDO emissions calculator. This is where you can see the emissions projections from those buildings that have already completed reporting. And we also have the website for BERDO that has all of the general information on the program, as well as the review board website that is specific to the review board. We also share the links to sign up for the newsletter, both the general BERDO newsletter and the review board newsletter. And then in response to Francis' question about air pollution, we also linked the BERDO environmental justice map that has mapped the BERDO buildings against different layers of data of air pollution. So you can see where BERDO buildings are located against where there's higher levels of asthma and respiratory hazards in Boston. And finally, I think we also share the form to learn more and apply for the Building Decarbonization Advisory Program. And finally, for those who live in residential condos, the BERDO Condo Handbook that helps navigate BERDO for those that need to comply with condominium rules.
Thank you, Claudia. All right, so again, I will leave a few more seconds here, and just as a reminder for those who may have joined late, if you would like to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and you cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, or you can send your questions to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. Diana Ziggy, I'm going to pause for a second just to check. Have there been any emails sent to the BERDO Review Board at boston.gov email?
No questions via the email, Chair.
Thank you, Diana. All right, and so we have one more chat here from Francis. Thank you. I would like to reach out to the staff after the meeting and ask further question. One other question, let's say 151 Tremont cannot reach zero emissions. How do fines help the building get to zero emissions? Not only is it going to be expensive to retrofit the building, but large fines are being planned, which is going to be very costly. So how are the fines that the building will be paying to the city help the building become zero emissions? Hannah, I will turn it over to you.
Great. And Francis, please feel free to reach out to our team and set up a meeting. We have a team member who's not on the call today. Her name is Dima, who's able to sit down or have a meeting with building owners to talk through their emissions and where they're projected to be, and talk about different opportunities that might be available to comply with the emissions limits. So in the case that a building might not be able to meet their emissions limits, you asked about fines. I want to just clarify for everyone on the call that there are two things that we have fines in BERDO, but we also have something else that is called an alternative compliance payment that I think to some people seems like a fine, but it's not technically a fine. The fines are for non-compliance. So if you don't report your data at all, and if you fail to meet your emissions limits, then you might be fined. If you are if your building has emissions above the limit, you can come into compliance by making an alternative compliance payment. And so that way you would avoid getting fined. But it still is a payment, and it's based on the amount of emissions you're above your limit. So it's currently set at $234 per ton of CO2 above your limit. If you were like, that makes no sense, what are those numbers? Our calculator that we shared the link to will help estimate what those alternative compliance payments might be for your building, with the first compliance period starting in 2025 up through future compliance years. What we know about most buildings that have reported their data so far, about 85% we're estimating are in compliance with the first emissions compliance year of 2025. So you likely won't need to do anything at all to stay under your emissions limit. Then in 2030, that the emissions limits become more strict, and more buildings will likely have to take action. So over half of the buildings at that point will have to do something to come under their emissions limit. The purpose of BERDO is really to get building owners to be planning for their emissions reductions over time. And so what I recommend you do now is reach out to Mass Save and start to build out that plan. So reach out to our team and reach out to Mass Save and explore options to decarbonize your building. And so what that might look like is doing a weatherization project and getting incentives through Mass Save. It might look like when it's time to turn to replace your boiler, considering if you have oil or gas, considering switching that to an efficient electric heat pump model. So really kind of using the time of replacement of work you're already planning on doing in your building to reduce energy use overall and to reduce your reliance on fossil fuels in the building. For some buildings, there is a lot of deferred maintenance, and building owners may not have the funds to address those the challenges and their very high emissions in the near term. And that's where the flexibility measures that are allowed under BERDO come into play. So if your building has very high emissions and is above its next limit, and there's really not time to take that action to address those emissions in your building, a flexibility measure might be available to you. So I'd recommend looking at those as well. Because the goal of BERDO is not to, collect a lot of money. The goal is to reduce emissions. And what the alternative compliance payments allow is if you're not able to make those reductions in your building, you are then in turn investing in emissions reductions that can happen elsewhere in Boston that have environmental justice benefits. So that's some of the thinking behind that of why we have the alternative compliance payments in the first place.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Francis, again for your question. Claudia Diaz-Martinez has also posted in the chat a link for those who are looking for one-on-one consultation, building consultation with the team in the Environment Department. I am going to be taking these last two questions and then close the comment period so that we can take time to have questions and comments from the board, as well as allow for the remainder of the city staff to present. So the first one here is from Mimi Ramos, formerly with NEU4J with the New England Community Project. One question our folks have is how more residents with lived experience can be members of the board. We know that there are layers of expertise needed for this work, but one big push was getting more resident voice in the decision-making process. I can either turn this over to Hannah or to Diana.
I can answer that. Thanks, Mimi, for the question. Thanks for joining tonight. So definitely, hear the desire and interest of having folks with lived experience on the review board. I will say that the review board, if maybe Diana or Ziggy, whoever is controlling the slides, can you go back to the slide that has the expertise? So the review board has a lot of responsibilities of approving flexibility measures and a lot of other important duties related to BERDO. And the rules and regulations for BERDO spell out the different areas of expertise that that board members need to have. And expertise can be demonstrated in a number of different ways. So that can be a degree, it can be a professional experience, or it can be lived experience. But the makeup of the board really intending to have representation and expertise in some capacity in environmental justice, affordable housing, labor rights, workforce development, building engineering and energy, real estate, public health, hospitals, architecture, and historic preservation. And the nominations are reviewed and weighed to make sure that the board has representation and expertise across these areas. What I would say for how to get folks onto the board, I would say that, as organizations are nominating individuals, really detailing and emphasizing how either as the individual can do this or the nominating organization, how that individual is bringing any one or many of these areas of expertise to the board, and what value they would add to the board. That helps staff and the mayor review the nomination and determine if they are a good fit for being seated on the board. I'm happy to have follow-up if necessary.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Mimi, for that question. The last question that we'll take here, and I should have mentioned earlier, there will be a second public commenting period, so this is not the last time to ask questions. But the question is from Ralph Parent. Is there a YouTube video explaining how to read the data/information that is on the BERDO emissions calculator Excel sheet? I noticed that Claudia has shared a resource to help navigate the calculator, but Claudia, is there anything else that you want to add for the members of the public in terms of understanding this calculator?
I don't believe we have a video explaining the calculator, but that guide should help anyone navigate and know how to input data and then to interpret it as well. But I would say you can also feel free to reach out to our team and we can help you walk through it over the phone or a Zoom call as well.
Thank you, Claudia. And in addition, just an acknowledgement from Francis that Francis will be reaching out to the city staff, and then also an acknowledgement from Mimi here saying, great, we can follow up to know what percentage of residents on the board makeup is also emphasized. It would be good to check in and appreciation. All right, so for right now, I will be closing this public commenting period and now turning it over to the board. I will now ask each board member if they have any questions or comment, starting with you, Board Member Boyd.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. I also don't have any questions at this time. I will now turn it over to Board Member Faruqi.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Thank you all for coming, all of you who are residents, members of the public. This is super, super valuable, so I really appreciate you spending your time with us. And it's very helpful for us as review board members to know any of your concerns or thoughts as this whole process unfolds. As we mentioned, this is the first time that this law is being implemented, in the first couple of years. So all of this is really helpful to be taken into account. And so I appreciate the things that folks have mentioned. And I want to build off of the question Mimi had asked a little bit earlier around the review board. I know that, as some of you in the public may know, that currently we don't have a full review board. There are 2 remaining seats. So it may be helpful if Environment Department staff are able to give an update about the status of those 2 remaining seats. I know some of us on the board have heard this, but for the folks in the public who are not frequent flyers with us on the review board, that might be helpful. Thank you.
I can provide an update.
Please do, Diana.
Yeah. So yes, thank you, Board Member Faruqi. Currently we have 2 open seats on the board. A full board would be 9 members. One one nominee has been appointed by the mayor. Her name is Jessica Boatwright. She has worked previously with the mayor's Office of Housing, actually working on decarbonization of affordable housing buildings within the city. We are currently in the stage where we're waiting to have a hearing for her nomination with the city council, but once that's complete and she's been approved, she will swear in with the city clerk and hopefully join the board by January is the goal. And then we have one more seat that's open, and that is a seat that's being accepting nominations on a rolling basis. I don't know if we said this explicitly yet, but for all the nominations, the mayor has to appoint the nominee. So we have a pool of nominees, and then the mayor's office makes an appointment from that pool. And so we are waiting for that to take place for the second seat.
And I will just add a quick clarification for this seat needs to be nominated by a community-based organization to be filled. So one of those organizations that was listed on a previous slide. So yeah, so any of those organizations can submit nominees, and we're evaluating them in conjunction with the mayor's office.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Diana and Hannah, for that. And yeah, and certainly during the next public comment period or any other times, folks in the public, please let us know if you have any concerns around the implementation of BERDO and how this affects you. Certainly, I'll say I always want to hear those. So please also feel free to follow up with me personally. And no further questions or comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. Over to you, Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you. I agree. It's good to have everyone here tonight because as Board Member Faruqi said, we learn from what we hear as review board members. So I would just say thanks again. And also, if you miss, I know we have at least one tenant who lives in the housing developed by Cobbin Square in DC, and definitely not putting that tenant on the spot by no means. But if you missed any part of the session or, just want any additional information, feel free to ask questions or outreach to the city or myself if you live in one of our properties. But thank you for coming, everyone. It's really important to have public voice in this.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Board Member Nelson.
No questions, but great job presenting the ordinance.
Agreed. Thank you, Board Member Nelson. And, just to add an additional comment, I want to acknowledge that, this building decarbonization policy is one of few in this country. And so it is amongst one of those leaders that exist in terms of action that is being taken locally to address our overall emissions within the city of Boston. So I want to acknowledge that the work that the Environment Department is doing and the Mayor's office is supporting. And lastly, just to make sure that I'm keeping up with the chat as much as possible, there was one quick question about how can one obtain the meeting minutes from Francis. Thank you, Claudia Diaz-Martinez, for posting where the meetings will be posted, the minutes. And then I believe there was just another follow-up question about outreach regarding one of the properties. And so I will leave that because that seems like something that Claudia and the environment staff is handling right now. All right, I will now ask if there are any other further questions or discussion from the board. Hearing none, I will turn it over to the remaining members of the city government to present on other resources for tenants. Thank you.
All right. Again, my name is Jenny. I use she pronouns, and I work on the Boston Community Choice Electricity Program, which is the city's electricity supply program for both residents and small businesses of Boston. I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible to explain, just because it can get a little confusing on how this really affects your bill and your day-to-day life. Can I get the next slide, please? So the best way to explain or to understand what BCC is understanding how it fits into your bill. So when you get your Eversource bill every month, you have two charges that combines into your bill. You have a delivery charge, which is always going to be managed by Eversource. Eversource will stay as the entity that delivers your electricity, maintaining the grid, and then also managing your billing and account information. And your supply charge is where your electricity comes from. The next slide, please. Your electricity can come from 3 different places, and this is where Boston Community Choice Electricity comes in. The first place is, like I mentioned, is coming from BCCE. If this is the city's a city program, it's not a company. So this is where the city negotiates with electricity suppliers for typically lower rates and typically for with higher renewable energy content that you're buying to really meet the different needs of Boston residents. And so it runs on a contractual basis, so meaning that for each contract period, those rates are locked in, and then residents and small businesses have the flexibility to choose to stay in the program, leave the program, or come back to the program anytime. And then when there's a new contract that's up, and then your account will be automatically enrolled into the default plan, which is typically the standard plan. And then again, you'll always have that flexibility in choosing to stay, leave, and come back and change between plans at any point with no penalties or fees. The second option of having on your electricity bill as a supplier is Eversource. So Eversource can be both your supplier and your delivery entity. And then they change their rates every 6 months, kind of gauging the market at the time when they buy a wholesale electricity. And then the third option that you may see that's not the city program or not Eversource is just having a third-party competitive supplier as the entity that's supplying your electricity. But the city doesn't necessarily recommend residents and small businesses engaging with them and signing contracts with competitive suppliers just because there's a long history of just really predatory practices, which I can get into in a little bit. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So yeah, competitive suppliers are costing us. So every 2 years, the Attorney General's office releases a consumer protection report where they outline how competitive suppliers cost both Boston residents, but Massachusetts residents as a whole, more money per year, per month, per billing cycle. If they choose to go with a competitive supplier instead of sticking to their local basic service, this means for us, for residents, this means if you went with a supplier, a third-party supplier, and didn't stay with Eversource, for example, you're typically paying more than if you had just stayed with Eversource, essentially. Next slide, please. So for example, in the April of 2023, Boston residents spent almost $500,000 more on their electricity bill if they had not stuck with Eversource as their supplier. And this doesn't even account for programs like Boston Community Choice Electricity, which are typically cheaper than Eversource in the long run. And so these things, so BCCE exists within our communities to kind of really mitigate volatile market prices of electricity. For example, if you were paying attention to your bill, like last year between January and June, you would have seen that rates with Eversource were like 25 cents per kilowatt. Some folks even saw their rates being at 60 cents per kilowatt because of the global impacts of energy consumption and generation. And so how can you spot like third-party suppliers and how do they really target our most vulnerable? So they try to get residents to sign up these contracts that typically have really high termination fees and are really misleading in sense of like they'll tell you they'll give you a really good cheaper rate, but they won't tell you that those rates will only last for anywhere from 3 to 9 months. And then after that initial introductory period, your rates may skyrocket or even change month to month. They typically target older residents, communities of color, residents with limited English speaking ability, and low-income residents because they're the most vulnerable in our communities. And some tactics you may have experienced or heard about is just folks door-to-door knocking, saying that they're from the city or part of the program. You may even see them tabling at grocery stores, trying to entice people to sign up with a gift card. If they sign up, they'll give you a gift card, things like that. And so just keeping some things to keep in mind is just always be really wary with your account information. Treat your account information just like any other information that's private and really important. And then always to be aware that the city of Boston will never call you first. BCC will never call you first and will never be going door-to-door knocking. Next slide, please. Here is just displaying the current rates with Boston Community Choice Electricity. So like I said, the standard is the default plan for folks. So if a new account gets auto-enrolled, that's what the plan that's the plan that you'll be enrolled in. And then we have 3 different plans to meet different needs of residents, whether it's you have financial constraints or you have you really care about the renewable energy content that you're buying. That's why we have these 3 plans. And Boston Community Choice Electricity, like I said, is not only limited to residents, but also small businesses, so commercial accounts can enroll into the program. The only eligibility requirement for commercial accounts who want to enroll is that they have each account that they have that they want to enroll must generate or use less than 1.5 million kilowatts per year. So that's where things can get a little complex. And then next slide, please. And here if you, once these slides are posted, are links to bill guides. So if you, like our Eversource bills just has a lot of information, can get really overwhelming. So we created bill guides to help break down each parts of your bill and identify who your suppliers, who your rates are, and other important information that you may want to know. And then that's all for me. Thank you.
All right, I'm next up. Hi, everybody. I'm Brooks Winter. I'm the Building Decarbonization Program Manager for the city. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Mass Save and some other programs to help with utility costs that are available through utilities and through the city. So next slide, please. So the Mass Save program is our statewide energy efficiency program. It serves everyone in the city of Boston, and I'm going to go back to that. Don't go back in the slides, Ziggy, but just going back to that Eversource bill graphic that Jenny used. I wanted to point out one piece of that, which is highlighted here, which is the energy efficiency charge. So whenever you or your landlord pays the gas or electric bill for your building, you are contributing to the pot of money that funds the Mass Save program. So my main message is that Mass Save is our money, and if you're not using the program, then you're losing the money that you're paying into it. So Mass Save offers incentives for appliances and other systems to help reduce energy waste and pollution. And it provides rebates and discounts on do-it-yourself weatherization materials, air conditioners and air cleaners, dehumidifiers, advanced power strips, shower fixtures, and faucet aerators. And that's just the list that I think is most relevant for renters. They also provide rebates for other systems as well. And you can get free energy assessments through Mass Save for your building, and free or discounted energy upgrades like insulation and heating and cooling. And those incentives are particularly generous for buildings where most folks are either low or moderate income. So if you live in affordable housing, for example, it's likely that your building qualifies for 100% free energy upgrades from increasing insulation to new heating and cooling systems. So also worth noting that while it's not perfect, the Mass Save program is one of the best and best funded energy efficiency and decarbonization programs in the country. So a really good tool for building owners and renters to be tapping into to help reduce energy bills and save some money. Next slide, please. So a nice thing that the Mass Save program has is a specific web page with resources for renters. So if you go to masssave.com/renters, or you can scan the QR code on the screen right now, that'll take you to a page with information about the specific incentives that you can use as a renter or a tenant in a rental building. And as I mentioned, there are discounts and free services available through Mass Save. And then one thing I will note too is that there's even more in terms of incentives and rebates that are available if you can get your landlord on board. And I'm a renter. I have tried to get my landlord on board. I know how difficult that can be. But if the landlord is willing to work with you, there are some even more generous incentives and even more substantial upgrades that can really increase the health and comfort of your living space and the building. So that page also has some resources and a short video about how to talk to your landlord about the Mass Save program and energy upgrades that they can make to your building. So again, that's masssave.com/renters. And I'll, if somebody, yeah, I see Claudia has already put it in the chat. So thanks, Claudia. Next slide, please. So I recommend that everybody, renters and building owners alike, check out the Mass Save program if they haven't already. But another thing that wanted to just talk about briefly is that the City of Boston has a website that we put together with information about other programs that can help lower your utility bills, or if you have utility debts that can help you pay those off and or alleviate some of those. So next slide, please, Ziggy. So those programs include, so each of the utilities that serve Boston, so Eversource for electric and National Grid for gas, offer discounted rates for folks with low incomes. So if you are below 60% of the median income, you can qualify for a discounted rate. And if you're not on that, I highly recommend checking that out and reaching out to your utility. Action for Boston Community Development, or ABCD, also runs the local home energy assistance program, so you can get help paying your heating bills. That's again for low income residents. There's also the Good Neighbor Fund for folks who are a little bit above that 60% income threshold, but still need some support. And then one thing that I just like to remind folks of is that there is shutoff protection. So your utility can't turn off your service if you're getting utility assistance. If that utility service is needed to heat your home, which in most cases includes either gas and or electric, and you're served by one of those so-called investor-owned utilities, which most or almost everyone in Boston is, certainly all BERDO buildings. So you can visit boston.gov/energy for more information about some of those utility resource programs, and or scan the code there. And there's an example of what that page looks like on the slide here. So I think that's it for my slides, and happy to answer questions if folks have them during the Q&A. Thanks.
If I might just jump in with one small thing, Brooks did a great job laying that out. I just want to note that we get this question a lot. If you are on the Eversource discount rate, you can still enroll in Boston Community Choice Electricity. Those are separate things, so it's just a separate way to reduce your bill. So there's no conflict. You can enroll in both the discount rate and in Boston Community Choice Electricity.
Thank you. That's to me. I'm Kathy Miranda. I'm from the Office of Housing Stability within the Mayor's Office of Housing. I'm here to go through the resources available in our office and also some associated stability supports available through some other offices. So at the Boston's Office of Housing Stability, we're a central resource for tenants in housing crisis. And that would be due to fire, natural disaster, condemnation, eviction, or if there's an upstream situation even prior to an eviction, which also encourage tenants to reach out to us. We have services in multiple languages. We provide tenants with legal support, information on emergency resources. We have upstream dispute resolution for tenants and landlords. And you can contact us here. This email address goes to all of us. It's housingstability@boston.gov. And our phone number is 617-635-4200, is staffed by at least 2 staff at all times, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So would definitely encourage you, if you are a tenant in Boston, even if you haven't had an emergency yet, if you have questions about your rights or you're concerned about an emergency that may happen in the future, it's good to call us, and we will let you know sort of what your rights are and what can be done in that situation. We have free legal clinics every week. Right now they're on Tuesdays from 5:30 to 7. Once a month, one of those clinics is being held in person. And you can find more information, details, and a link to register on our website. We have some educational guides on our website as well, for housing search, top 10 things a tenant needs to know, top 10 things for landlords to know, to educate tenants on the process and their rights. And then we also work with the Metro List, which is a tool to find affordable housing in Boston. We don't manage the list directly ourselves, but we can answer any questions if people are using the Metro List and have questions about a specific listing or just how to use the resource. They're welcome to call and we can go through that with people. And we're a housing crisis supportive services that we provide as well. So we provide a variety of supportive services. We partner with 14 different nonprofits in the city to really expand our ability to provide those services. So shout out to all of those nonprofit agencies that we work with as well, who do a lot of great work. And we are able to, if people qualify, we're able to connect them with ongoing case management, access to financial assistance, and the tools they need to stabilize their situation. You can go to the next. This slide speaks to the Age Strong Commission. If you are age 55 plus, Age Strong's housing team can support you in finding and or stabilizing you in safe, secure, and affordable housing. Their number is there as well as their website. They do help with housing search and application support, referrals to legal service providers, fuel assistance application support, advocacy of landlord tenant, and then also they can assist in filing a housing discrimination complaint. So there is some overlap between the work that we do because our office works also with people of all ages. But the great thing about the Age Strong Commission is that they can also help callers with other wraparound supports related to their housing because they also have some other staff that work on benefits access and some other things. So they're a great resource to know about. This slide talks a little bit about your rights. So Boston tenants have legal protections, which not everyone is fully aware about. These are just some of them that they've chosen to highlight that come up often. One is the Housing Stability Notification Act. So whenever issuing a notice to quit or a non-renewal of lease, landlords are required to notify tenants of their rights, direct them to resources, and to notify the Office of Housing Stability. There's a portal where landlords enter that information and it comes to us directly through our database. We follow up with a tenant who receives a notice to quit, and they also receive that packet with the notice to quit that tells them their rights. So people often call us once they receive that, which helps us to then be able to connect them with support. The condo and co-op conversion ordinance is another right that tenants have, and it says that tenants have to be notified of an owner's intent to convert rental properties with 4 or more units to residential condos or co-ops using a tenant notification form at least 1 year in advance. So if you're a tenant and you are concerned that that wasn't followed or you're being displaced by a condo conversion, definitely do give our office a call. There's also a housing discrimination complaint process through the Boston Fair Housing Office. Through the commission oversees an investigatory process. So if you're concerned about housing discrimination, that's also a resource, and there's links there on the slides. The Center for Working Families helps provide some different types of wraparound supports. They're a central resource to connect residents to financial, education, and employment services, including one-on-one coaching, credit and asset building services, free tax assistance, job training. They have a long list of services. They're a really great resource. There's their email there and their phone number with some links to some of the different services they provide.
Okay, thank you all for your presentations. I would like to open a second public comment period. As a reminder to members of the public to provide a public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you are calling in and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 or send your questions to staff via email at BERDO.reviewboard@boston.gov. If we have a high volume of comments, we may ask folks to limit their comments to 3 minutes to ensure everyone has a chance to speak. If you can, we'd also appreciate you introducing yourselves. We will now wait to give members of the public the opportunity to provide comments. And I already see a hand up from Arlene. Arlene, please ask your question or provide your comment.
Yes, hi. I live in a private development, and I fell behind in my rent because I wanted them to recalculate my rent based on the income I had. And when it was official that it was going to be my rent, I said, okay, fine. I came and I paid that month. So this was on the 10th, and on the 15th, she sent me a letter notice to quit because I didn't pay for 2 months the increase that I was questioning. So I went into to the Grove Hall session and I applied for rental assistance. But my manager told me, even though I applied and I have a case number, she's still going to continue with the notice to quit if I don't get the money by the 15th of the month, which is, when my rent was due. So I had to go and borrow the money to pay off that rent. So is that a legal thing that they can do? Because they gave me the information to go apply for assistance, but then the assistant said 4 to 6 weeks, but she said, that's fine, but I'm not going to wait. I'm going to still take you to court for notice to quit.
Thank you, Arlene. Kathy, I think I'm going to turn that question over to you.
Sure, I would say that would be a great question for our legal clinic. I'm not a housing attorney myself, so I don't want to attempt to answer the question directly, but if you call during business hours, we do have an attorney on staff as well as at the legal clinic that could provide a more detailed response to your question to find out whether that was legal. These are definitely type of issues that should come to our office. And we also can refer to our mediation team to help mediate those issues if something happens again or if it continues to be unresolved.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Arlene.
Thank you, Kathy, for your response, and Arlene, thank you for your question. Just following the chat here, I see some positive comments from Mimi. First off, lifting up the Boston Community Choice Electric program that Janine presented on. So thank you for that, Mimi. And Arlene also mentioned, I'm assuming this is in relation to Mass Save, that they also offer light bulbs and ask to see your light bill to help lower it. And Claudia has posted some links here regarding Mass Save and the boston.gov/energy. I'm assuming Boston Community Choice Electric is what that link is for. Arlene also mentioned, thanks for letting us know, how we can get assistance from 2 different agencies. Diana has posted several links that was already presented in the slides. So I will also give a little bit of time here for folks to ask additional questions, either by raising their hands or posting in the chat. In the meantime, just to get an immediate reaction, I just want to uplift Janine, the program that you talked about, Boston Community Choice Electric. I am enrolled in that program. I also wanted to say, unfortunately, I was one of those folks that ended up dealing with those door knockers and accepting that program way back when I first moved into Boston. So I just want to uplift that program as being something that has been a positive change compared to the amount of money that I was spending on those bills in my early days in Boston. The one thing that I just wanted to add, I know you mentioned door knocking, but can you talk about the letters that folks might be getting in the mail? Are those also a part of that? And you mind commenting on that, Janine?
Yeah, so I would say be aware of letters that say that they're from the city of Boston. So if you receive a postcard or a letter packet, always just look out for different like logos, city official seals. That means they came directly from us. So the program only sends 2 types of mailings in general. The first type is the welcome letter packets. We send these out every 3 months to new Eversource accounts that open within that period to auto enroll them into the default standard plan. And in that letter, you'll see a welcome letter, a opt-out postcard with a city seal on it, and a consumer protection card, which outlines or a letter, which outlines the different rates that you have and what kind of really outlines what this program is on the state level. And then the second type of mailings that this program actually sends out are consumer protection cards. These are postcards. These are typically targeted to folks who either previously opted out of the program when the program initially started back in 2021, who didn't really understand what this was and didn't want to be, rightfully so, was confused about what the program is and didn't want to be involved until they got more information. So those postcards are just for folks just to remind them that we exist, to reach out if they had any questions. And then the second type of mailings are for folks who we identified are either not on Eversource and not on BCCE. So these are folks who are on third-party suppliers, and just giving them a heads up that they have a third-party supplier. BCCE is here as an alternative option if they're paying too much with their own contracts with a third-party supplier. Be careful on other there's plenty of other companies that have really similar acronyms as BCCE, and so we have lots of residents, myself included, who get really confused about Like Clean Choice Energies is an example, which has a really similar acronym. Like when I got mailing from them, I thought that was BCCE until I started the job and was like, oh, actually, this is not the same thing. So just being really aware, I think the general rule of thumb is do not give out your account information to entities, to mailings, to people that you can't verify who they're from, who they're calling from, who they're mailing from, and always double check all information that someone tells you.
Thank you, Janine. And what I'm also taking away from that is making sure you look out for the city logo on these letters that are coming to individuals' mailboxes. All right, so we have a question in here from Frank. And the question states, are there any incentive available for condos owned by BPDA under a 65-year lease to cover costs of keeping intact historical integrity for the building upgrades? An example, we received a price of $50,000 per condo, which is 94 units, for custom windows to replace like for like or building owned by BPDA that our association is leasing. I am wondering if I should turn this question over to Hannah, perhaps?
You can. I thank Frank for the question. I am not sure I have a good answer for you. I would say that you are certainly eligible for all of the incentives available through Mass Save, assuming that the condo owners in your building are paying utility bills. In terms of the long-term lease agreement you have with the BPDA real estate team or the planning department, I would, I'd have to know more of the details of that arrangement. And I'd also recommend, talking with the folks in the real estate team there. And then it also sounds like there's perhaps a like historic building requirement. And I'm curious if those requirements for the like for like replacement are coming from a directive from a landmarks commission. Because that might be another effort, yeah.
Hi, Hannah. It's not deeded a historical building, but it's in the Navy Yard. So while it's not historical, they're still saying that we have to replace a triple hung like for like window, that we have 94 units and 235 windows. So each condo owner is being assessed $50,000 because they are supposed to be like for like versus we're getting pricing of less than like a third of that for double hung windows.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know specifically about that specific situation, but if you want to follow up, you can send I'm gonna say send me an email. I am currently this week and next on a jury, so I'm going to be very slow at responding to emails, but I will put my email in the chat and I will try to forward it to folks on our team and with the historic preservation team to at least get try to get some more eyes and brains on this to get you an answer on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate it. Good job, guys.
Thank you, Frank, for your question, and thank you, Hannah, for your response. I will wait a few more seconds here, or maybe a minute, for any other individuals that may have any questions or comments for the city staff members. Okay, I will close this second public comment period, but more than happy to open it back up if necessary. And I will now ask each board member if they have any questions or comment. I will be going in reverse order this time, starting with Board Member Nelson.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Nelson. Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you. A couple of comments. I just want to thank the city because this is some great information, Jenny, Brooks, and Kathy, that have been imparted. I hope you can hear me. I've been having some audio problems. Thank you. So I think it's been great information, and I want to, excuse me, reiterate what Jenny was saying about community choice electric. It's really easy to be deceived because they are using names that sound similar to Boston Community Choice Electric, but they are not Boston Community Choice Electric. So I think that it's important that no matter how sophisticated, educated we are, that we pay attention. I know even some people who've in our office who've gotten fooled by those competitive private folks that knock on your door and offer all these low cost electricity rates and then jack it up within months. And in one example, the staff person was paying at least 50% more in her electricity bill than someone who had a similarly sized dwelling. It was just amazing. And this is a person who's highly educated. So it's really important. It doesn't matter how educated you are, it's important to be really careful and pay attention to the names that they're hawking, because they are trying to make it sound like Boston Community Choice Electric when it is not. So I thank you for that information, Jenny. And then I also wanted to ask if is the BCCC information in that boston.gov/energy link? Is that where it's found, or is there a separate link that people can go to just for that?
There is a link to our page on that boston.gov/energy, but I can also put it into the chat as well for everyone.
Great. And my last comment is to Brooks, I guess, is I know from participating in a NESI conference about 2 years ago that Mass Save, which we all pay into, has an enormous amount of money in its pot. So, I mean, I recall the figure, but I don't want to put it out there. And I wondered if you could, educate us, if you know, Brooks, about the amount of money in the Mass Save pot as a way of incentivizing people to take advantage of the money that they're paying into.
Absolutely, Gail, and thanks for the question. It is an enormous amount of money. I think the total for 2022 to 2024, the sort of budget that Mass Save is wrapping up at the end of this year, was $4 billion. And the total for 2025 to 2027 is $4.99 billion. And so it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that we are all paying into the pot and should be making use of. And one other thing I'll note about that budget for the next 3 years is that thanks to the advocacy that the city was involved in, and folks like Hassan and Mary Wambui and maybe your team, Gail, have been doing for years now at this point to advocate for a more fair and equitable Mass Save program. The folks who run Mass Save have allocated almost $2 billion of that almost $5 billion budget specifically for equity initiatives, they're calling it. So that includes serving low and moderate income folks and renters, importantly. And I think their budget for serving rental customers in that 3-year time period is over $600 million. And renters are one of the kind of groups of customers that the Mass Save program has not done particularly well at serving in past years, but they are saying in this next plan, we really want to make sure that we're serving renters and landlords and rental buildings in that 3-year time span. So that's where you all come in. I mentioned sort of talking to your landlords about the program. They're going to be making significant investments in weatherizing rental buildings, installing clean energy systems like air source heat pumps, which are a huge win for the climate, and particularly if your building is heated with electric resistance. Oil or propane, that can result in significant energy savings and lowered utility bills. So thanks for teeing me up to talk about that, Gail. But I think it's really important that we all do our part to make sure that Mass Save is successful and also accountable to serving renters well in the next 3 years.
Thank you, Brooks and Jenny. The only I would just end on, what Brooks is saying is that folks can not only live healthier by taking advantage of these type of energy retrofit dollars, but also save money. So it affects your health and your pocketbook. So just another thing, another thought. Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore. Over to you, Board Member Faruqi.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to the city staff for this very informative presentation throughout the night. This has been great. And I just want to reiterate that, signing up for community choice electricity takes all of maybe 5 minutes on that digital form. You don't even have to mail anything in, which is great. And it's important, even just to double check. I mean, similar to Board Member Lattimore, I mean, we work with residents all the time who are in these competitive electric supply contracts paying 2 times, sometimes even up to 4 times more for what they should be paying. So all of us right now can actually check to see which, what we're on with our electric bills and can sign up for community choice electricity. So even if you think you're not, you may well be, and you may have signed up a long time ago, and we've seen that. So thank you for sharing that. And don't have any other questions or comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Faruqi. I'm circling back again to that, same thing, the community choice electric, and what Board Member Lattimore said. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you can be fooled. As I sit on this board, I can tell you I fell for it. One of the things that I actually wanted to ask in terms of the Mass Save program. So Brooks, when you were presenting earlier, you had mentioned energy assessment for buildings. And so one of the things that immediately popped in my mind is, what about energy assessment for apartments? Can a tenant, and I'm going to ask 2 different phrases of this question. If a tenant really doesn't have an engaged landlord and the landlord doesn't really care, what can they do? Can they use Mass Save for doing an energy assessment of just their apartment?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chair. So you can, so I would recommend visiting the masssave.com/renters page. That'll have all of the sort of most current information about what you can do as a renter. I think there is sort of an online home energy assessment that you can do for your rental unit, and that'll sort of help generate some recommendations about ways to save energy. One other resource that I can put in the chat that is, I don't know, fairly useful is sort of a list of recommendations that we have for folks about ways to save energy in your apartment. But yeah, so there is stuff that you can do as a renter without your landlord's permission, and certainly you can get rebates for, say, a window air conditioner, assuming you're allowed to install that in a window. I've gotten rebates for an air purifier, a dehumidifier, and an air conditioner. And those are all things that I can do. Didn't have to ask my landlord about that. I think I probably checked in with her before putting the air conditioner in. But yeah, I think, and then beyond that, I live in a two family apartment, but I think for larger, for BERDO buildings, obviously, had a really interesting conversation last week with somebody who's moving into supportive housing and wanted to have a conversation with the building manager about solar opportunities and Mass Save. So I'll drop my contact info in the chat. I love having conversations with people about how to maximize Mass Save. And I have a pretty good sort of email template built out with the list of the various resources that folks can make use of. I don't think we've mentioned it yet tonight either, but community solar is another thing that renters can take advantage of to lower their utility bills in addition to BCC and Mass Save. And yeah, there's some good resources out there to see whether you qualify and where you can get signed up for a community solar program. But yeah, so if you can get your landlord on board, there's more opportunities and kind of a more comprehensive energy assessment. But I can drop the link to that sort of online home energy assessment that you can do for rental units as well. I'll put that in now.
Thank you for that, Brooks. And as a follow-up question, now going on a completely different end of the spectrum, so you mentioned about the resources available for helping you chat with your landlord. Now, what if your landlord is through a large rental organization or agency? What does that look like? And is the resource that you're referring to also helping an individual in a rental unit have a conversation with a larger rental agency?
I think, yeah, the resources are, so there's kind of a helpful video that sort of talks about how you can frame Mass Save and kind of what messaging you can use to talk to your landlord. I would say for a larger management company, some companies may have sort of energy or sustainability managers on staff there. So if you can figure out who that person is, they may be thinking, well, I would say, like, particularly for BERDO buildings, they're going to be, if they're um, if they're paying attention, they're going to be thinking about BERDO compliance, and BERDO compliance is a good opportunity for you to ask them some questions and or bring some resources to their attentions. So you can, if you wanted to be really prepared, you could look up their BERDO compliance status with the resources that were shared earlier. And then if you can find the person to talk to, I think you could say, I noticed that the building's not going to be in compliance starting in 2030. Have you done a Mass Save energy assessment? Have you made use of all the resources? For larger multifamily buildings, Mass Save still has really, really great programs. They're more customized and less prescriptive. So you're not necessarily going to be able to say there's $10,000 for a heat pump that you can get, but the yeah, the incentives for multifamily buildings are still significant and generous. And then I think on top of that, there were some folks referenced the federal tax incentives for energy efficiency, and we have more information about those on our Retrofit Resource Hub website, which I can drop the link to in the chat as well. So yeah, I think if you wanted to approach a building manager or sustainability manager, you could kind of lay out the case to them and say, you know, we're leaving money on the table if we're not making use of these programs, and they can help us prepare for BERDO compliance.
Okay. And last question, and I'll make sure to get back to the chat momentarily. Is Mass Save, this is me coming back because majority of these properties that are rental units are the larger ones. So is Mass Save actively engaging? Because I do hear one angle is that maybe they have a sustainability manager, or maybe, you know, they have someone on staff that is actively engaged in the process of utilizing the incentive. But I'm wondering about the reverse. Is there any opportunity where Mass Save is actually reaching out to these rental organizations that may not be engaging in a way that you've noticed for a long time?
Yeah, I can answer that one.
Okay, thank you.
So I would say that, you know, as the BERDO team, we are pushing resources out to BERDO building owners and property managers, sharing information about Mass Save and encouraging people to take advantage of those, as well as information about tax credits and all of that. In addition, we are working with Eversource and National Grid, and who are the providers of Mass Save in Boston, and are trying to figure out how we can better kind of do that coordination with large buildings and help with, you know, doing some partnership in terms of outreach that they might be able to do directly to BERDO building owners. So we're doing that as well, but you know, I think the more times you hear about a program, the more likely you are to take advantage of it. So would just echo everything that Brooke said, and then also echo that, you know, if if your apartment in your BERDO building that you're renting is like very drafty and you want, you know, Mass Save to come and take a look at it and do some weatherization, you can also reach out to folks on our team and we can figure out if we have a contact with the management company through BERDO and or other means and kind of make that nudge and suggestion as well to them to consider Mass Save.
Thank you, Hannah and Brooke. And very quickly, based on what's in the chat earlier, I forgot to mention Diana had shared information about housing stability contact information. That's housingstability@boston.gov. And their phone number is 617-635-4200. And then several other links regarding the Boston Community Storage Electric have been shared, and their email is bcce@boston.gov, and the number is 617-635-3850. Following up on a question that I think I was asking earlier from Board Member Lattimore, back to Brooks here for a moment. How often can someone get a Mass Save assessment done on their apartment or home?
I believe it's once every 3 years. Does that sound right? It's like once every 3 to 4 years. I don't remember exactly.
My memory is once every 2 to 3 years, so
Okay.
I think 3 is a good guess, but yeah.
If you don't remember when the last time you had an energy assessment done, you can probably get another one done. And I think that's another thing that you know, the programs change all the time. That 3-year budget, 3-year plan that I mentioned, the $4.99 billion, it's not final yet because the Department of Public Utilities still is reviewing it. They're going to be having hearings about it this week. But I mentioned the sort of exciting investments in equity initiatives and support for renters. There's also going to be I think some exciting stuff coming in that plan specific to Boston and other so-called designated equity communities. And we've been working really closely with members of the Mass Save program to sort of shape some special offers for buildings that house Section 8 or housing choice voucher holders, those that are currently heated with delivered fuels like oil and propane, like I mentioned. And if that all is approved, that could include free everything. Weatherization, the assessment will be free. Weatherization, if there are things like non-tube wiring or other issues with the building that need to be addressed before they can do weatherization, as well as 100% covered heating systems like air source heat pumps. So that's all still in the works and to be determined. But I think that's once that all is approved and once the details are finalized, really looking forward to sharing more details about the changes to the program. So now's a good time if you haven't in a while to get an energy assessment of your building done, or to talk to your landlord about doing an assessment. And then, yeah, those new and hopefully improved offerings should be launching early 2025.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Board Member Lattimore, for that follow-up question. Brooke has also shared in the chat the online home energy assessment link, as well as the Retrofit Resource Hub website that was mentioned a little while ago. All right, so that's it for my comments and questions. I will now check and see. Board Member Boyd, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Boyd. Are there any other further questions or comments from board members? Board Member Lattimore.
Thank you. Really quickly, I believe this was covered in the presentation that probably Jenny did, but if you could reiterate where people can find on their utility bill what source they're paying, meaning who, if they are paying BC Boston Clean Community Choice, or if they're paying the utility company, or if they're paying usually private company. If you could point that out, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, so there's two places on your bill where you can find who your supplier is. The easiest one is typically on the first page. So if you normally get online billing, so when you open up the PDF, that should be the first page you scroll down to. And if you get paper billing, this should be the front side of the single side, like the single page of your bill. And so it's typically in the blue box where it should say current charges for electricity. And in bold, it'll say your supplier is, and under that will be your supplier. So for the city of Boston, if it says billing for City of Boston CCE, that means you're enrolled in the program. And then under that we'll have our current contracted supplier. So in this case, it's Direct Energy. And then if you see anything else, that is who your supplier is. So if it's Eversource, it'll say Eversource. And then if it's another third-party supplier, it'll say the company name and then their address and contact information.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny and Board Member Lattimore. I would like to, just for the sake of the public, just open up one final public comment period. I know we're getting close to time, but I think there was a lot of information just shared when the board members were asking questions. And so I just want to provide a little space in case anyone else has questions from the public. Please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom platform. And if you're calling in, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 or send your question to staff via email at BERDO@boston.gov. So I'll wait a couple of seconds just to see if there are any other questions or comments from the public. Right, hearing none, I will close that public commenting period. Thank you, members of the city, for presenting on these many different initiatives that are definitely useful. I feel like I need to go check if I've done a home assessment in a while myself. So I appreciate all of the resources and the time that you've spent sharing it with the tenants who have been actively participating for the last almost 2 hours now. All right. Moving on, second on the agenda is to approve the previous meeting minutes from November 25th. Are there any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes?
Sorry, Chair. Could I quickly
Sure, Diana. Yep.
interrupt? So I just wanted to share formally that that concludes our formal agenda item for the annual tenants meeting and our first annual tenants meeting. Folks are obviously welcome to stay, but just for transparency, we will now start doing some of our usual admin updates, but folks are welcome to stay or leave if you'd like to. So yeah, just wanted to formally announce that that was the end of that agenda item.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, this is indeed the end of the first annual tenants meeting, with the meeting with the city, the BERDO Review Board, and the representative from the mayor's office. So thank you all for participating, for those of you who have hung with us till now. Okay, now, second on the agenda is to approve the previous meeting minutes from November 25th. Are there any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the motion to approve the meeting minutes, board members may vote in favor, oppose, or abstain if they did not attend the last meeting. Those in favor of approving the meeting minutes may say aye or show their hands. Aye.
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 All right. Those who abstain, please say abstained.
Abstained.
The ayes have it. The motion passes for the previous meeting minutes. Diana, just want to do a post check here. I did just now see a question come in from the public here. I don't want to leave them, leave them hanging. From Margot, will most tenants have to pay their own electricity bill even if they didn't before? I'm not sure how to approach this right now. What are your suggestions, Diana?
Yeah, we can, if the board would like, we could try to answer it right now. Depending if the board is willing to stay. I see a couple acknowledgements. I think it sounds like yes.
Yes, please go right ahead. Hannah.
Okay, I will try to answer this. Margot, I don't know if your question is kind of about BERDO or Mass Save in general, but most tenants have to pay their own electricity, even if they didn't before. I don't anticipate that, anything that we talked about today would shift the burden that you have to pay your electric bill or not. So that would be determined by your lease agreement with your landlord on who is responsible for paying those utility bills. So that is, we don't expect that to change at all through any BERDO compliance, or through participation with Mass Save or signing up for Boston Community Choice Electricity. If you don't pay your electric bill, and your landlord does, you can't sign up for yourself to join Boston Community Choice Electricity unless you have an electric bill. So I think that's the only thing that I would say there. But again, please reach out to our team if you do have follow-up questions on that.
Thank you for taking that, Hannah, and thank you, Margot, for your question. And I echo that. Please follow up with the team if you have any further questions. All right, so now I will turn it over to Ziggy for the administrative updates.
I see that Board Member Lattimore has her
My
hand raised.
apologies,
Yeah.
I did not see that. I'm so sorry. Board Member Lattimore.
No problem, no problem. I just want to add to Margot's question, and mainly because Margot is a tenant living in Coppin Square in DC development.
No problem.
So I know very well the answer to that question. The answer is no. We do not anticipate any changes to who pays the electricity at her location. So if she does not pay electricity currently, there's nothing on our docket to change that. So I just want to provide, I could do that on the side because I know Margot well, but I just figured I'd answer it also here.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore, coming to the rescue for that question there. I appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right. Ziggy, next are the administrative updates. Thank you.
All right. So I'm gonna start with reviewing the number of applications for flexibility measures. We have received a total of 23 building portfolio applications. We are reviewing 2 applications currently, and we expect to have resubmissions for ICS and H hardship compliance plan applications soon. Another update on the Equitable Emissions Investment Funds Award. We have received 1 signed grant agreement back and hoping to close the remaining 2 soon. And also want to give one last reminder about the BERDO workshop in Austin Brighton that's happening tomorrow at the Faneuil Branch Public Library from 3 to 7. And the workshop will provide free BERDO assistance for building owners, and more information can be found on the event page on the BERDO website at boston.gov/BERDO. And then looking at our timeline, on this Thursday, December 12th, RDH will host their last training session for the review board. The training session will be 90 minutes. And then just saying a reminder to the review board that I will send out the new invitations for the 2025 meetings tomorrow. And then the full 2025 calendar is up on the BERDO review board website at boston.gov/BERDO /review dashboard. And then the next meeting for the first review board of 2025 is scheduled for January 13th. Happy New Year.
Thank you, Ziggy. Just one quick question from your administrative update regarding the BERDO workshop that's being held in Austin Brighton from 3 to 7. If there are board members that would like to attend, is there a specific time that you would recommend they show up if they wanted to show up?
Yeah, definitely everyone is welcome. And we will be all there from 3 to 7. So really any time that is convenient for building owners and for review board members to show up, they're welcome.
Thank you.
And we are expecting perhaps a rush when it starts at 3 p.m. So perhaps if you want like a slower time, not at 3, but otherwise anytime.
Thank you, Claudia. And Board Member Lattimore?
Yeah, it's just a quick question about the hearing on the City of Boston's building portfolio application. Is that scheduled for January? I know was supposed to be on the agenda a couple of times and got moved, and just wondered if there's a more firm date for that or
Yes,
or
I
not.
can I can chime in. Thank you, Board Member Lattimore, for that question. It's a good reminder. Yes, so we plan to have the City of Boston building portfolio hearing on January 13th. For transparency reasons, they had to have the application updated, and we lost a staff member who was working on it. So January 13th is the date.
Understandable. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Diana, and I hope we're able to publicize that information. I know I've been asked that question a couple of times about the City of Boston's presentation. So right after the New Year's, I hope you're able to put it in a newsletter or whatever needs to be done to communicate that so that members of the public are able to attend. All right. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
On the motion to adjourn this meeting, board members in favor say aye.
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 The ayes have it. The motion passes. This meeting is adjourned at 6:32 p.m. Thank you all and happy holidays / happy
Happy
New Year's.
holidays. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.
Bye.